April 24, 1944. The dense Ardennes forest, southeastern Belgium. Corporal James Walton of the 555th Engineer Battalion crouched motionless among the towering spruce trees, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid morning air. His battalion, one of the few all-black units in the segregated United States Army, had been tasked with clearing vital supply routes through this unforgiving wilderness. What Walton couldn't know as he surveyed the silent forest was that within 72 hours, his unique skills would transform the battle for the Ardennes crossroads and save hundreds of Allied lives. The Germans believed their elite sharpshooter unit had an impenetrable advantage in these woods. They would soon discover how catastrophically wrong that assumption would prove. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable account of how one man's forgotten civilian expertise, developed in the lumber camps of Louisiana, would become one of the most innovative tactical advantages of the European campaign, forever changing how the military would approach forest warfare. When the United States Army began drafting men for the Second World War, James Walton had already spent 15 years working as a lumberjack in the dense forests of northern Louisiana. At 34 years old, he was considerably older than most recruits, but his physical condition rivaled men a decade younger. Standing 6 feet 3 inches with broad shoulders and powerful hands, Walton had developed extraordinary strength from years of felling massive pine trees in the humid southern forests. What made him truly exceptional, however, wasn't merely his physical prowess, but rather his uncanny ability to move through dense woodland without making a sound. In those Louisiana forests, Walton would later write in letters to his wife Evelyn, "You learn to become part of the trees. The creatures teach you, deer, foxes, even the smallest birds. They move without disturbing a single leaf. After years, you begin to understand their language." Like many African Americans during World War II, Walton was assigned to a segregated engineering unit rather than a combat division. The 555th Engineer Battalion was comprised entirely of black soldiers, with white officers commanding them. Their primary tasks involved building bridges, clearing roads, and constructing airfields, crucial but often overlooked work that kept the Allied advance moving forward. Many of these men had been skilled laborers in civilian life, carpenters, masons, mechanics, and, like Walton, lumberjacks. Colonel Thomas Whitfield commanded the 555th, a West Point graduate from Virginia. Whitfield had initially requested a combat command, but was instead assigned to the engineering corps. At 45, he was considered too old for frontline duty, a fact that privately frustrated him. However, Whitfield was a pragmatic leader who quickly recognized the exceptional skills of the men under his command. "These men can build anything," he noted in his field journal. "Given proper materials and direction, there is no engineering task they cannot accomplish with remarkable speed and precision. What they lack in formal military training, they more than compensate for with practical expertise." By April 1944, the Allied forces were preparing for the massive invasion of Normandy, but operations throughout the European theater continued. The Ardennes forest had become strategically important as both German and Allied forces recognized its value for moving supplies and troops. Situated along the borders of Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany, the forest contained critical crossroads that could determine the speed of military movements. Sergeant Major Isaiah Reynolds, the highest-ranking non-commissioned officer in the battalion, assembled a special detachment for a mission in the Ardennes. A former construction foreman from Philadelphia, Reynolds had earned the respect of both his men and the white officers through his unfailing competence and calm leadership. "Walton," Reynolds said during the mission briefing, "you're going with the advance team. We need to clear a route through the eastern sector for artillery transport. Intelligence suggests minimal enemy presence, but we're taking precautions." Lieutenant Gregory Palmer, a young white officer from Boston, who had studied engineering at Massachusetts Institute of Technology before the war, would lead the 12-man team. Though only 26, Palmer had quickly earned a reputation for treating his men with unusual respect for the era. "The lieutenant actually listens," Private First Class Marcus Johnson, another member of the detachment, later recalled. When Walton or any of us spoke about forestry or construction, Lieutenant Palmer paid attention. He understood our expertise came from years of real work, not textbooks. The advance team departed before dawn on April 23rd, moving in 2 transport trucks toward the designated sector. Besides Walton, the team included Corporal Henry Lewis, a former railroad worker from Georgia, Private First Class Johnson, who had worked as a carpenter in Chicago, and 9 other skilled men, each bringing civilian expertise that would prove invaluable. "The forest reminds me of home," Walton remarked as they approached the Ardennes, "except these trees have seen far more history than our Louisiana pines." "And probably more bloodshed too," added Lewis quietly. Lieutenant Palmer unfolded a detailed map across the hood of the lead truck as they reached their destination. "We need to establish a viable route from this point," he indicated a small clearing, "to this crossroads 7 kilometers northeast. The ground needs to support heavy artillery, specifically 105mm howitzers and their transport vehicles." What none of them realized was that this seemingly straightforward engineering task would soon become something entirely different. Intelligence had indeed been incorrect. The forest wasn't merely home to minimal enemy presence, but rather harbored a specialized German sniper unit that had been systematically targeting Allied reconnaissance and advance teams throughout the region. Oberst Colonel Friedrich Müller commanded the 37th Special Reconnaissance Company of the German Army. Müller had personally selected 30 of the most skilled sharpshooters from various units, many of whom had been hunters or foresters in civilian life. They had established a network of carefully concealed positions throughout this sector of the Ardennes, creating what Müller called in his field reports a hunting ground, where they could observe, report, and when necessary, eliminate Allied forces without revealing their presence. "The forest is our greatest ally," Müller instructed his men. "Learn to become invisible within it and you become unstoppable." By a remarkable coincidence, Müller's philosophy mirrored Walton's own approach to forest movement, 2 men from vastly different worlds who had independently developed similar relationships with woodland environments. But while Müller's skills had been developed in the Black Forest of southern Germany, Walton's had been honed in the dense pine forests of Louisiana. Their paths were about to converge in a contest of expertise that neither could have anticipated. The American engineering team began their work shortly after sunrise on April 24th. Lieutenant Palmer divided them into 3 groups, an advanced survey team, a clearing team, and a soil assessment team. Walton was assigned to the advance team alongside Private Johnson and Corporal Lewis. "We move quietly," Walton cautioned his companions. "Something doesn't feel right about these woods." Johnson glanced at him curiously. "What do you mean? Notice how quiet it is? No birds singing, no small animals moving in the underbrush. Something, or someone, has disturbed this place recently." Lewis nodded in agreement. "I've spent enough time in forests to know when something's off." Their concerns were validated less than 30 minutes later, when a single shot rang out, striking a tree mere centimeters from Private Johnson's head. The men immediately took cover as Lieutenant Palmer ordered everyone to hold position. "Sniper!" Palmer called out. "Nobody move until we identify the location." For 17 tense minutes, the entire detachment remained frozen in place, barely breathing as they strained to detect any movement in the surrounding forest. Eventually, Palmer made his way to Walton's position, crawling carefully between the thick underbrush. "We need to get back to the vehicles and report this," the lieutenant whispered. "This area isn't cleared as intelligence claimed." Walton studied the forest intently before responding. "Sir, with respect, I don't think we can retreat. The shot came from approximately 400 meters in that direction," he pointed northeast. "But I suspect there are others. The way this forest is situated, they likely have multiple positions covering all approaches. You're suggesting we're surrounded?" "Not exactly surrounded, sir, but strategically observed. These aren't ordinary soldiers. They're hunters." Lieutenant Palmer considered this assessment. Despite being the commanding officer, he recognized when specialized knowledge exceeded his own expertise. "What do you suggest, Corporal?" This moment, a white officer deferring to a black soldier's judgment in 1944, was extraordinary. For Walton, it represented something he rarely experienced in civilian life: professional respect regardless of race. "Let me scout ahead, sir." In Louisiana, I tracked game through forests thicker than this. I can move without being detected." Palmer hesitated. "That's extremely dangerous, Walton. These are trained military snipers, not deer. With respect, sir, the principles are the same. Every hunter leaves signs. Every hunter has habits. Give me 2 hours. I'll find their positions without them finding me." After careful consideration, Palmer agreed, though he modified the plan. "Take Lewis with you. Johnson, you return with me to establish a secure position with the others. 2 hours, Walton. Then you report back. This is reconnaissance only, understood?" "Perfectly, sir." What followed would later be documented in multiple after-action reports and eventually find its way into specialized training manuals for forest operations. Walton and Lewis began moving through the forest using techniques that had nothing to do with conventional military training and everything to do with generations of woodland knowledge. "Move when the wind moves the trees," Walton instructed Lewis. "Step precisely where I step. And remember, everything in a forest connects. Disturb one thing, you potentially alert everything." For the first hour, they moved less than 400 meters, advancing with extraordinary patience. Walton would frequently stop, kneeling to examine broken twigs, displaced leaves, or subtle impressions in the soft forest floor. He observed patterns in the canopy above, places where branches had been minimally adjusted to create firing lanes while maintaining concealment. "There," he whispered to Lewis, pointing to a nearly invisible arrangement of branches approximately 300 meters ahead. "That's not natural formation. Someone's created a blind." Lewis squinted. "I wouldn't have noticed that in 100 years. Most people wouldn't. That's what makes it effective." By the end of their 2-hour reconnaissance, Walton had identified 7 different sniper positions, each meticulously camouflaged and strategically placed to cover major approaches through this section of forest. What became increasingly clear was that this wasn't merely a defensive position. It was an elaborate trap designed to ambush any Allied forces moving through the area. When they returned to Lieutenant Palmer's position, Walton sketched a detailed map showing each identified location and their likely fields of fire. Palmer studied it with growing concern. "This is a professional operation," the lieutenant concluded. "We need to report this immediately and request infantry support." "Sir," Walton said hesitantly, "bringing in a large infantry unit would likely result in significant casualties. These positions are too well established. They'd pick off many of our men before we could neutralize the threat. What alternative do you suggest?" "We can't simply leave these snipers in place. They control a critical transit route." Walton took a deep breath. "I believe a small team, specifically trained in forest movement, could approach these positions undetected. With proper preparation, we could neutralize this threat with minimal risk." Palmer looked skeptical. "And where would we find such specialists? Our nearest special operations units are deployed elsewhere." "You have them already, sir. Myself, Lewis, Johnson, we've spent our lives in forests. This isn't so different from tracking game, except the stakes are higher." Sergeant Major Reynolds, who had joined them during the debriefing, spoke up. "Lieutenant Walton is being modest. Back in Louisiana, he was known as the Ghost among the Lumberjacks. Men would lose bets trying to detect him moving through the forest. If anyone can approach these positions undetected, it's him." This conversation would later prove pivotal in military history, a moment when conventional military doctrine gave way to specialized civilian expertise. Lieutenant Palmer made an unprecedented decision. He would request permission to form a specialized team led by Corporal Walton to address the sniper threat. The communication with battalion headquarters was tense. Colonel Whitfield was initially resistant to the proposal, concerned about placing black engineering soldiers in a direct combat role, not only because of the danger, but also because of potential political repercussions within the segregated military structure. "This is highly irregular, Lieutenant," Whitfield's voice crackled over the radio. "These men aren't trained for combat operations." "With respect, Colonel," Palmer responded, "Corporal Walton possesses specialized skills perfectly suited to this particular situation. I believe his approach offers the highest probability of success with minimal casualties." After further discussion, Whitfield reluctantly authorized a limited operation with specific parameters. "You have 48 hours. If the situation isn't resolved, we'll deploy conventional forces regardless of potential losses. With authorization secured, Walton began assembling what would later be informally called the Lumber Company, a specialized team of 6 men from the Engineer Battalion, each selected for their specific woodland expertise. Besides Walton, Lewis, and Johnson, the team included Private William Tanner, a former hunting guide from Mississippi, Private First Class Robert Jackson, who had worked as a trapper in Arkansas, and Private Harold Green, who had grown up tracking game in the mountains of North Carolina. Lieutenant Palmer would officially command the unit, but in practice he deferred to Walton's expertise in forest operations. "This is your domain, Corporal," Palmer told him. "I'll handle communication with headquarters and provide whatever support you need, but you'll direct the actual operation." Throughout the afternoon and evening of April 24th, Walton trained the team in specialized camouflage techniques unlike anything in the military manuals of the time. Using materials gathered from the forest itself, mud, plant matter, charcoal from their cooking fire, he showed them how to break up the human silhouette in ways that rendered them nearly invisible among the trees. "The human eye is drawn to patterns and movement," he explained. "We eliminate both. No straight lines, no regular shapes, and above all, patience in movement." What made Walton's approach revolutionary was his emphasis on complete environmental integration. Unlike standard military camouflage, which often focused on visual concealment alone, Walton taught techniques that addressed sound, scent, and even the subtle disturbance of vegetation. "Everything you touch will remember you past," he instructed them. "Every broken twig, every bent blade of grass tells a story to someone who knows how to read it. Our job is to move without leaving that story behind." By the following morning, April 25th, the team had prepared extensively. Each man carried minimal equipment, standard-issue M1 rifles with attached bayonets, canteens, and a few essential tools. They had removed anything that might create noise. Dog tags were wrapped in cloth, equipment secured with strips of rubber, metal surfaces dulled with mud. Lieutenant Palmer gathered them before departure. "Remember your training. Follow Corporal Walton's lead exactly. Your objectives are clear. Identify each sniper position, neutralize the threat, and return safely. Questions?" Private Jackson raised his hand. "Sir, what exactly does neutralize the threat mean in this context?" Palmer and Walton exchanged glances. Both men understood the question reflected a deeper concern. These engineering soldiers were being asked to transition from builders to eliminators of human life. "Your primary objective is to remove the enemy's capacity to threaten Allied forces," Palmer explained carefully. "Capture when possible, but your safety comes first. These snipers have already taken Allied lives. They won't hesitate to take yours." Walton added, "We're not hunters of men. We're protectors of our comrades. Remember that distinction." The operation began at 0500 hours on April 25th. Moving in 3 two-man teams, they entered the forest using the infiltration routes Walton had identified during his reconnaissance. The morning mist provided additional concealment as they advanced with extraordinary patience, sometimes taking several minutes to move a single meter. Walton and Jackson formed the lead team, Lewis and Green the second, while Johnson and Tanner comprised the third. Lieutenant Palmer remained at the forward operating position, maintaining radio contact through a series of pre-arranged signals, simple clicks on the handset that wouldn't be recognizable as communication to anyone monitoring frequencies. The first contact occurred approximately 2 hours into the operation. Walton and Jackson had approached within 30 meters of one of the identified sniper positions, a carefully constructed blind built into a natural depression and covered with local vegetation. Through hand signals, Walton directed Jackson to maintain position while he circled around. The German sniper, Feldwebel, Sergeant Klaus Weber, had been operating in this sector for 17 days. A former gamekeeper from Bavaria, Weber had recorded 11 confirmed eliminations of Allied personnel. His position was considered virtually undetectable by conventional forces, a perfect integration of natural terrain features and careful construction. What Weber couldn't have anticipated was encountering someone whose woodland skills matched or even exceeded his own. As he scanned the forest through his scope, Weber remained completely unaware that Walton had already circled behind his position, approaching with such stealth that not even the birds took notice of his presence. The encounter was brief and decisive. Walton employed a technique he'd learned from an elderly Choctaw man in Louisiana, moving during natural sound events in this case, a sudden gust of wind that rustled the entire forest canopy. The momentary auditory distraction provided cover for his final approach. Weber never heard Walton. The first indication of another presence was the cold pressure of a bayonet against his neck and a quiet voice instructing him in basic German to remain perfectly still. Bewegungslos bleiben, keine Geräusche. Stay motionless, no sound. The sniper was efficiently secured with cord from Walton's pack, his weapons and equipment disabled. Using pre-arranged signals, Jackson approached to help secure the prisoner, while Walton documented the exact location and construction of the blind. Information that would prove valuable for future operations. By mid-afternoon, the team had successfully neutralized 4 sniper positions using similar techniques. Each position revealed consistent patterns, expertly camouflaged, strategically placed to cover key approaches, and operated by highly skilled personnel. What became increasingly clear was that this wasn't a random deployment, but rather a coordinated network designed to control movement through the entire forest sector. The 5th encounter presented new challenges. This position was more sophisticated, a 2-man team operating from an elevated platform constructed 15 meters above the forest floor. Lewis and Green located it after noticing subtle alterations to the branches of several adjacent trees, creating concealed firing lanes while maintaining natural appearance from below. The increased complexity required adaptation. Using hand signals, Lewis coordinated with Walton's team to establish a perimeter, while Green began a painstakingly slow ascent of an adjacent tree. This approach took nearly 40 minutes, moving incrementally to avoid creating movement patterns that might attract attention. When Green finally reached a position level with the German emplacement, he could see both operators clearly, one manning a scoped rifle, while the other used binoculars to scan distant sectors. Neither was aware of the American presence mere meters away. Across a small gap between trees, Green signaled the positions to teams on the ground. Walton responded by initiating a coordinated approach, a precisely timed convergence that would give the snipers no opportunity to respond or alert other positions. This encounter concluded similarly to the previous ones, with both German soldiers efficiently neutralized, without alerting any other positions in the network. By nightfall, the team had successfully addressed 7 of the identified positions, with prisoners and captured equipment secured at their forward operating base. Lieutenant Palmer communicated the progress to Colonel Whitfield, who responded with cautious approval. "Continue the operation," the colonel instructed, "but remain vigilant. Intelligence suggests these positions may be more numerous than initially estimated." That intelligence proved accurate. Debriefing the captured snipers revealed this was indeed part of a larger operation, specifically the 37th Special Reconnaissance Company under Oberst Müller's command. According to the prisoners, at least 23 additional positions existed throughout the sector, each operating semi-independently, but within a coordinated communication framework. Most concerning was the revelation that Oberst Müller himself was operating in the field, personally commanding a central position that served as the unit's command post. This position reportedly contained comprehensive maps of the entire network, as well as detailed intelligence on Allied movements throughout the region. "If we can locate and secure Müller's position," Palmer observed, "we potentially neutralize their entire operation at once." That evening, Walton refined their approach based on new information. The prisoners had revealed that their communication system relied on bird call signals at specific intervals, a detail that Walton immediately recognized as valuable. "They're using natural sounds as cover," he explained to the team, "but that works both ways. We can use their own system to track the network." Through the night, team members took turns monitoring these communications, gradually mapping additional positions based on response patterns. By dawn on April 26th, they had identified 7 more locations, including what appeared to be a central hub that matched descriptions of Muller's command post. The second day of operations proceeded with increasing efficiency as the team refined their techniques. Each successful approach provided new insights into the German unit's methods, allowing Walton to further adapt their tactics. By mid-afternoon, they had neutralized 12 additional positions, bringing their total to 19. The remaining positions, including Muller's command post, presented greater challenges. As the German network became aware of missing check-ins from neutralized positions, their security posture intensified. Communication signals changed, patrols between positions increased, and overall vigilance heightened significantly. "They know something's happening," Walton observed, "but they don't know what. That uncertainty works in our favor if we maintain our approach." Lieutenant Palmer agreed, but added a caution. "Time is becoming critical. Our 48-hour window expires tomorrow morning. If we haven't neutralized the primary threat by then, conventional forces will deploy regardless." This reality added urgency to their final planning. Based on prisoner intelligence and their own observations, Walton determined that Muller's command post was likely situated at the convergence of several natural ridgelines, approximately 2 kilometers from their current position. The location offered optimal observation of major transit routes while remaining virtually undetectable from conventional aerial or ground reconnaissance. "This will be our most challenging approach," Walton told the team as they prepared for the final phase. "Muller is reportedly their most skilled operator, a former forestry master from the Black Forest region. He won't be easily surprised." The plan they developed represented the culmination of everything they had learned. Rather than approaching as separate teams, they would move as a single, coordinated unit, using techniques that blended individual expertise. Johnson's carpentry skills would enable them to move through the forest canopy where necessary. Lewis's railroad experience provided insights into creating distractions along predictable timelines. Jackson's trapping knowledge offered methods for securing routes without detection. As dusk approached on April 26th, the team began their most ambitious infiltration yet. Their target lay at the heart of the German network, a position that, according to prisoners, contained not only Muller himself, but also comprehensive documentation of German operations throughout the Ardennes sector. They moved with extraordinary patience, often spending 15 or 20 minutes traversing distances that would normally take seconds. Every step was calculated, every movement timed with natural forest sounds. As darkness fell, they utilized techniques for night movement that Walton had learned from decades of pre-dawn hunting, feeling terrain through boot soles rather than relying on vision, using peripheral rather than direct sight to detect movement, registering subtle changes in air pressure that might indicate openings or obstructions ahead. By midnight, they had approached within 100 meters of the suspected command post location. Through night vision scopes, they could make out subtle indicators of human presence, marginally higher heat signatures from concealed positions, minimal light diffusion that suggested shielded illumination, the absence of normal nocturnal wildlife movement in specific sectors. "There," Walton whispered, indicating a particular configuration of trees ahead. "That's not natural growth pattern. Those 3 spruce trees have been repositioned to create a blind." Lieutenant Palmer studied the area through his scope. "I don't see anything unusual. Are you certain?" "Absolutely. The spacing is wrong, exactly 170 centimeters between trunks. Nature doesn't work in such precision." This observation proved correct. As they continued their careful surveillance, they gradually discerned the outlines of an expertly camouflaged structure, built into the hillside and concealed by transplanted vegetation. What appeared to be natural forest features were in fact carefully constructed blinds and observation posts. The command post was more substantial than any previous position they had encountered, essentially a reinforced bunker with multiple observation points and concealed entrances. Based on movement patterns, they estimated between 6 and 8 personnel operated from this location. "This isn't just a sniper nest," Lewis observed quietly. "This is a proper field headquarters." Walton nodded. "Which makes our approach even more challenging. Multiple observers, potentially overlapping fields of view." After careful consideration, Walton proposed a strategy that drew from traditional hunting methods rather than military tactics. Rather than attempting direct infiltration, they would create what hunters called a pressure pattern, gradually restricting the operational area through coordinated movements that would channel the occupants in predictable directions. "We don't need to enter the structure," he explained. "We need them to exit in a controlled manner." The execution required extraordinary coordination. Throughout the pre-dawn hours, team members strategically positioned themselves around the perimeter, establishing invisible boundaries through minimal adjustments to the surrounding environment, breaking specific branches to block certain routes, adjusting ground cover to make some paths more appealing than others, creating subtle funnels that would naturally direct movement. As dawn approached on April 27th, they initiated the final phase. Johnson and Tanner created a carefully calibrated disturbance approximately 200 meters northwest of the command post. Nothing as obvious as a sound or visible movement, but rather a progressive pattern of minor environmental changes that would register subconsciously to trained woodsmen as potential threat direction. The technique Walton employed was one he'd learned from observing wolf packs in Louisiana, creating an illusion of encirclement through coordinated movement that suggested multiple predators. In hunting terminology, this was known as ghosting the perimeter, making prey believe it was surrounded by far more threats than actually existed. As anticipated, the German occupants of the command post registered these subtle disturbances. Through their scopes, the team observed increased activity, personnel checking observation points more frequently, adjusting positions, scanning sectors with greater intensity. "They sense something's wrong," Walton whispered to Lieutenant Palmer, "but they can't identify what or from where. That uncertainty will eventually force movement." Palmer nodded, impressed by the psychological dimension of Walton's approach. This wasn't merely physical concealment, but rather a sophisticated manipulation of the observer's perception, creating doubt and tension that would ultimately compromise decision-making. By 0700 hours, the pressure strategy began yielding results. 2 German soldiers emerged from the northwest entrance of the command post, moving cautiously to investigate the perceived disturbances. Their movement patterns revealed their training. They separated to cover multiple angles, maintained irregular timing, and utilized available cover effectively. What they couldn't know was that this response was precisely what Walton had anticipated. Their path took them directly into a natural channel created by the team's subtle environmental modifications. As they reached a predetermined point, Lewis and Green executed the next phase, a coordinated interception that neutralized both soldiers simultaneously without producing any sound that would alert the command post. "2 secured," Lewis signaled to Walton. No alert triggered. The removal of these sentries created a critical gap in the command post's security perimeter, a blind spot that Walton immediately recognized as their opportunity. Using hand signals, he directed Johnson and Jackson to approach the northwest entrance, while he and Tanner maintained observation on remaining access points. Johnson and Jackson advanced with exceptional stealth, utilizing the technique Walton had termed shadow stepping, moving exclusively through areas already cast in natural shadow, creating no new silhouettes or movement patterns that would register to observers. Their progress was methodical but effective, bringing them within meters of the entrance without detection. Inside the command post, Oberst Möller was becoming increasingly concerned about his missing sentries. A veteran of multiple campaigns, Möller possessed instincts honed through decades of woodland experience. He could sense the encroaching pressure, though its source remained frustratingly elusive. "Something isn't right," he told his communications officer, Lieutenant Werner Schmidt. "The forest feels wrong." Schmidt looked puzzled. "Wrong in what way, Herr Oberst?" Möller struggled to articulate what his instincts were telling him. "The patterns have changed. The natural rhythm is disrupted. I've experienced this before. In Russia, when Siberian hunters tracked our positions, they moved like ghosts." This conversation would later be recounted by Schmidt during his interrogation. What Möller was experiencing, though he couldn't name it, was the effectiveness of Walton's approach, the subtle psychological pressure created through environmental manipulation rather than direct engagement. At 0730 hours, Mueller made the decision that Walton had been orchestrating through careful pressure. He ordered a repositioning of the command post. "We'll relocate to fallback position Delta," Mueller instructed his remaining 4 personnel. "Gather essential documentation and equipment. Leave everything else." This decision presented the perfect opportunity that Walton's team had been creating. As the German personnel began preparations to move, their attention focused inward on securing materials, rather than maintaining perimeter security. This subtle shift in priorities, barely perceptible but critically important, created the opening Walton needed. Using predetermined signals, he coordinated a simultaneous approach from multiple directions. Johnson and Jackson maintained position at the northwest entrance, while Walton and Tanner circled to cover the southern exit. Lewis and Green established containment positions on the eastern perimeter, effectively creating a complete encirclement. The operation culminated with precision timing. As the first German soldier emerged from the southern exit, carrying document cases and field equipment, he encountered Walton and Tanner in positions that left no opportunity for resistance or alarm. Within minutes, all personnel exiting the structure were secured, including Oberst Müller himself, who emerged last carrying his personal sidearm and field maps. Müller's expression upon seeing Walton revealed an immediate and profound recognition, not of the man specifically, but of what he represented. Later, during formal debriefing, Müller would state through translators, "I knew immediately I had encountered a superior woodsman. His camouflage was perfect, beyond anything in our training. He simply appeared, as if materializing from the forest itself." By 0800 hours on April 27th, the entire command post had been secured. Lieutenant Palmer arrived to formally accept Müller's surrender and inspect the captured materials. What they discovered exceeded expectations. Comprehensive maps detailing not only the sniper network, but also German defensive positions throughout the Ardennes sector, communications protocols, and intelligence assessments of Allied capabilities. "This is extraordinary," Palmer told Walton, as they inventoried the documents. "This intelligence will save countless lives." Walton nodded, but seemed preoccupied with examining Müller's personal equipment, particularly his customized camouflage uniform that incorporated several techniques similar to those Walton himself had developed independently. "He understands the forest," Walton observed. "Different training." Different forest, but the same principles. Müller, observing this assessment of his equipment, addressed Walton directly in halting English. "You are forest man? Hunter?" "Lumberjack," Walton responded simply. "Louisiana pine forests." A look of professional recognition crossed Müller's face. "Ah, I was gamekeeper. Black Forest. We learned same lessons from different teachers." This brief exchange highlighted something profound that transcended the conflict, the universal language of woodland knowledge that crossed cultural and political boundaries. Both men had developed their skills through intimate connection with forest environments, arriving at similar techniques despite never having contact. As the prisoners were processed and the captured intelligence secured, Lieutenant Palmer composed his report to Colonel Whitfield. The 48-hour operation had resulted in the capture of 30 German personnel, including Oberst Müller and his entire command staff, the seizure of valuable intelligence, and the complete neutralization of the sniper network that had been controlling this vital sector of the Ardennes. Most remarkably, the operation had been accomplished without a single casualty on either side. Palmer's report contained an unprecedented recommendation. Corporal James Walton has demonstrated exceptional tactical innovation and leadership throughout this operation. His specialized expertise proved decisive in accomplishing objectives that conventional approaches would have found impossible with acceptable casualty rates. I formally recommend immediate field promotion to sergeant and consideration for specialized training roles. This recommendation would generate significant discussion at headquarters, particularly given the racial constraints of the segregated military. Colonel Whitfield found himself navigating complex political considerations while recognizing the undeniable value of what Walton and his team had accomplished. "The results speak for themselves," Whitfield noted in his endorsement of Palmer's recommendation. "This operation has provided intelligence that will fundamentally alter our approach to the Ardennes sector. The methodologies employed deserve serious consideration for broader application. By April 29th, as news of the operation reached higher command, Walton and his team were summoned to division headquarters for debriefing. Major General Robert Carson, commanding the regional engineering operations, personally interviewed each team member, focusing particularly on the specialized techniques they had employed. "These methods aren't in any field manual I've ever seen," Carson remarked during Walton's interview. "Where exactly did you develop these approaches?" "From the forest itself, sir," Walton replied. "Every environment teaches you its rules if you pay attention long enough. The techniques worked in Louisiana for tracking deer and wild boar. The principles remain the same when applied to different objectives." Carson seemed both impressed and thoughtful. "You're suggesting that civilian expertise, particularly from rural backgrounds, offers tactical advantages our conventional training doesn't address?" "In certain environments, yes, sir. The men in my unit each brought knowledge from their civilian lives that proved valuable in ways standard military training couldn't anticipate." This conversation would later be referenced in Carson's formal report to Allied Command, leading eventually to the establishment of specialized training protocols that incorporated rural expertise into woodland operations. Though this development wouldn't be fully implemented until late in the European campaign, it represented a significant evolution in military thinking about specialized knowledge. For Walton and his team, however, the immediate aftermath of the operation brought more practical recognition. On May 2, 1944, Walton received field promotion to sergeant. Lewis, Johnson, Jackson, Green, and Tanner each received commendations and advancement to higher non-commissioned ranks. Lieutenant Palmer was awarded the Bronze Star for his leadership during the operation. Perhaps more significant than the formal recognitions was the change in how these men were perceived within their unit and beyond. Word of their accomplishment spread through adjacent commands, creating a reputation that transcended the usual constraints of segregated service. They became known informally as the Forest Ghosts, a designation that acknowledged their unique capabilities. Colonel Whitfield, initially hesitant about employing his engineering troops in such unorthodox operations, became an advocate for specialized applications of civilian expertise. In his monthly command assessment from May 1944, he wrote, "We have perhaps overlooked our greatest resource, the specialized knowledge our men bring from civilian occupations, particularly among our colored troops, many of whom come from rural backgrounds with generations of practical environmental knowledge. There exists expertise that no military academy could hope to instill. Properly recognized and deployed, such knowledge represents a significant tactical advantage." For Walton personally, the operation's success created opportunities previously unimaginable. By June 1944, as Allied forces executed the Normandy landings, he received transfer orders to a newly formed training detachment focused on specialized forest operations. His role would be developing instruction protocols based on his techniques, teaching others the methodologies that had proven so effective in the Ardennes. "They're calling it environmental integration training," he wrote to his wife Evelyn. "Fancy name for what my grandfather simply called forest sense. I'm teaching officers and men from both colored and white units. In the classroom, at least the color lines seem less rigid. The forest doesn't care what color you are, only whether you understand its language." This assignment represented something revolutionary in the context of 1944 military structures. A black, non-commissioned officer instructing white officers and troops in specialized techniques. Though officially framed as technical consultation rather than formal instruction, a semantic distinction necessary given the era's racial constraints, the reality was that Walton had become recognized as an authoritative expert, regardless of rank or race. Lieutenant Palmer, who maintained correspondence with Walton throughout this period, noted the significance in a letter dated July 1944. "What you've started goes beyond tactics or techniques. You've demonstrated that expertise transcends our artificial boundaries. That recognition, however limited at present, represents a small but meaningful crack in a very old wall." By August 1944, the techniques developed by Walton's team had been incorporated into specialized training for reconnaissance units operating in heavily forested regions of the European theater. Though never formally published in standard field manuals, these approaches were transmitted through a network of instructors who had trained directly under Walton and his team members. Oberst Müller, meanwhile, provided valuable intelligence during his detention. His professional respect for Walton's skills created an unusual rapport that facilitated cooperation. During one debriefing session, Müller made an observation that would later be quoted in several military assessments. "You Americans had an advantage we couldn't anticipate. Your society forced these men, these exceptional woodsmen, into lumber camps and rural occupations where they developed skills no formal military could teach. Then you brought them to our forests, where those skills proved decisive. The irony is that your own prejudice created the very expertise that overcame our positions." This observation, though uncomfortable for many American officers to acknowledge, contained profound truth. The segregation that had limited opportunities for Black Americans had inadvertently created concentrations of specialized environmental knowledge that proved tactically valuable in specific contexts. As the war in Europe progressed toward its conclusion, the impact of the Ardennes operation extended beyond its immediate tactical significance. The intelligence captured from Müller's command post provided crucial insights into German defensive strategies throughout the region, directly contributing to the planning of operations that would eventually breach the Siegfried Line. For the men of the 555th Engineer Battalion, the operation created new recognition of their capabilities. Though they returned primarily to engineering duties, building bridges, clearing roads, constructing airfields, they did so with enhanced status and respect. Their expertise was increasingly sought for specialized applications where environmental knowledge proved valuable. Sergeant Major Reynolds, who had initially advocated for Walton's approach, reflected on this evolution in his personal journal. "Something fundamental has shifted. Our men have always known their worth, their skills, their knowledge, their capabilities. The difference now is that others have begun to recognize it too, not universally, not completely, but meaningfully nonetheless. Each such recognition builds foundation for what comes after." By early 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, Walton had trained over 200 specialized personnel in his environmental integration techniques. His instructional role expanded to include consultation on operations in the densely forested regions of southern Germany, where terrain similar to the Ardennes presented comparable tactical challenges. In February 1945, Walton received a field commission to second lieutenant, an extraordinary advancement for a black soldier in the still segregated military. The promotion citation specifically referenced his exceptional contribution to specialized tactical methodologies and instructional expertise. While such advancement remained exceedingly rare, it represented institutional recognition of value that transcended existing boundaries. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Lieutenant Walton was serving as technical advisor to a specialized reconnaissance unit operating in Bavaria. His journey from Louisiana lumberjack to commissioned officer represented a remarkable trajectory, one made possible through the undeniable value of expertise that military training alone couldn't provide. The post-war period brought further evolution of the methodologies Walton had pioneered. As military structures adapted to Cold War realities, specialized environmental integration became formally incorporated into training for certain elite units. Though rarely acknowledged in public histories, the lineage of these techniques could be traced directly to the Ardennes operation and the Louisiana lumberjack who had demonstrated their effectiveness. For Walton personally, the return to civilian life in 1946 brought both opportunities and familiar constraints. Despite his military achievements, many professional doors remained closed due to persistent racial barriers. He eventually returned to Louisiana, where he established a small forestry consultation business, focusing on sustainable logging practices. "The forests taught me everything of value," he would later tell his children and grandchildren. "How to move, how to listen, how to understand the connections between all living things. Those lessons proved useful in unexpected ways, but their greatest value was always in the forest itself, in learning to work with nature rather than against it." In the decades following the war, as military historians began examining specialized operations that had influenced tactical development, The Ardennes operation gradually emerged as a significant case study. By the 1960s, as military training increasingly incorporated environmental expertise, instructors at certain specialized schools would reference the Walton methodology when teaching advanced concealment techniques. Colonel Whitfield, who retired in 1952 after a distinguished career that included significant contributions to military engineering doctrine, maintained correspondence with Walton throughout the post-war period. In one notable letter from 1958, Whitfield reflected, "What you and your men accomplished in those Belgian forests has had more lasting impact than either of us could have anticipated. The principles you demonstrated, that specialized civilian expertise could prove tactically decisive in specific environments, has influenced an entire generation of operational planning. That your contribution came despite, rather than because of our military structures, makes it all the more remarkable." Lieutenant Palmer, who completed law school after his military service and eventually became a federal judge, would later cite his experience with Walton's team as fundamentally transformative to his understanding of expertise and authority. In a 1972 interview for a military history publication, Palmer stated, "Working with Sergeant Walton, he was Corporal Walton then, completely recalibrated my understanding of where valuable knowledge originates. The academy had taught me to respect formal training and hierarchical authority. The Ardennes taught me that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, and that true expertise rarely respects our artificial boundaries." Perhaps most remarkable was the long-term connection between Walton and Müller. After Müller's release from prisoner of war status and return to Germany in 1947, the two men established correspondence that would continue for decades. Despite having met as opponents in war, they discovered profound common ground in their shared understanding of woodland environments. "We speak the same language," Müller wrote in a 1953 letter to Walton. "Though we learned it in different forests on different continents, the trees taught us both, and in that teaching created an understanding that transcends other boundaries." This unlikely friendship, built on mutual professional respect, eventually extended to personal visits. In 1967, Müller traveled to Louisiana as Walton's guest, spending 2 weeks exploring the pine forests that had shaped Walton's expertise. The following year, Walton reciprocated with a visit to the Black Forest region, where Müller demonstrated the environmental knowledge that had informed his own approach. During this visit, the two men collaborated on a manuscript titled Forest Wisdom, Environmental Knowledge in Woodland Operations, which detailed their respective methodologies and the universal principles that connected them. Though never commercially published, the manuscript circulated among specialized military and forestry professionals, eventually finding its way into instructional materials for both fields. In 1972, as the United States military underwent structural changes following the Vietnam conflict, a comprehensive review of specialized training methodologies led to formal recognition of what had become known as the Ardennes model, the integration of civilian environmental expertise into specialized tactical applications. A classified training manual from this period contained direct reference to techniques pioneered by Walton's team, acknowledgement that came nearly 3 decades after their development. For the other members of the original team, post-war lives reflected varied trajectories. Henry Lewis returned to railroad work, eventually becoming a senior operations manager for a Southern railway company. Marcus Johnson established a successful carpentry business in Chicago, specializing in high-end cabinetry and furniture. William Tanner returned to Mississippi, where he operated a hunting guide service that became regionally renowned for its expertise. Robert Jackson and Harold Green both utilized GI Bill benefits to pursue education, Jackson in wildlife management and Green in engineering. Each man carried the experience of the Ardennes operation as a defining moment when their civilian knowledge had proven unexpectedly valuable in military context. Though they rarely spoke publicly about their wartime service, their families and close associates knew they had been part of something extraordinary, an operation that had challenged conventional approaches and demonstrated the value of specialized environmental knowledge. By the 1980s, as military training increasingly emphasized adaptive expertise and environment-specific capabilities. Instructors at certain elite schools would occasionally reference the Ardennes operation as a historical case study in unconventional problem-solving. Though names and specific details remained classified in many contexts, the essential methodology had become incorporated into standard training for specialized units operating in woodland environments. James Walton lived to see this evolution, though he remained characteristically modest about his contribution. When interviewed for an oral history project in 1987, at 77 years old, he deflected personal credit. "I didn't invent anything new. The forest had been teaching those lessons for thousands of years before I came along. I just happened to be in a position where that knowledge proved useful in unexpected ways. The real credit belongs to the trees themselves. They're the true teachers for anyone willing to listen." Walton passed away in 1991 at the age of 81, having lived to see significant changes in both military approaches to specialized environmental training and broader social structures. His funeral was attended not only by family and local community members, but also by several former military personnel who had been influenced by his methodologies, including 3 retired generals who had studied his techniques during their specialized training. In 2004, as part of a broader initiative to recognize overlooked contributions to military history, a training facility at Fort Benning, Georgia was designated the Walton Environmental Integration Center. The dedication ceremony included the unveiling of a simple plaque that read, "Named in honor of Lieutenant James Walton, whose innovative application of civilian woodland expertise during World War II established foundational methodologies for environmental integration training. His contribution reminds us that valuable knowledge often comes from unexpected sources." The ceremony was attended by Walton's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, many of whom had never fully understood the significance of his wartime service. For them, the formal recognition provided new perspective on the quiet, unassuming man who had taught them to respect and understand the forests of their Louisiana home. Perhaps the most enduring legacy, however, was not the formal recognition, but rather the continuing influence of the methodologies themselves. By the early 21st century, specialized military units operating in woodland environments worldwide employed techniques that could be traced directly to those pioneered by Walton's team in the Ardennes forest. Though the connections had become obscured through decades of evolution and adaptation, the fundamental principles remained recognizable to those familiar with the original approaches. In 2012, a declassified historical assessment of specialized woodland operations included this observation. The methodologies first demonstrated during the Ardennes operation of April 1944 represent a watershed moment in the integration of civilian environmental expertise into specialized tactical applications. That these approaches were developed by engineering personnel rather than combat specialists, and emerged from African American soldiers whose specialized knowledge had previously gone unrecognized in military contexts, makes their contribution all the more significant. The subsequent influence on woodland operations doctrine across multiple decades demonstrates how valuable expertise often transcends institutional and cultural boundaries. For military historians, the Ardennes operation gradually came to represent something more than merely a tactical success. It exemplified how specialized knowledge from unexpected sources could prove decisive in specific contexts, challenging conventional assumptions about where valuable expertise originated. This recognition extended beyond military applications to influence broader understanding of specialized environmental knowledge in multiple fields. In 2017, when Muller's grandson donated his grandfather's papers to a military history archive, researchers discovered extensive notes on the Walton methodology that Muller had studied and incorporated into his own forestry practices after the war. These materials included detailed sketches of camouflage techniques, movement patterns, and environmental integration approaches that showed clear influence from the Louisiana lumberjack who had once been his opponent. The accompanying letter from Muller to his grandchildren contained this reflection. The forest speaks one language to all who truly listen, regardless of nationality, race, or circumstance. My greatest teacher in this universal language was not my forestry professors or military instructors, but rather an American lumberjack who approached the woodland with profound respect and understanding. That we met first as opponents in war and later as friends in peace demonstrates how shared knowledge can transcend artificial boundaries. The forest taught us both, and through that teaching, created connection where none might otherwise have existed. For the men of the 555th Engineer Battalion, the Ardennes operation represented a moment when their specialized knowledge, developed through generations of practical experience in environments often imposed by racial and economic constraints, proved unexpectedly valuable in military context. That this knowledge would eventually influence specialized training methodologies decades after the war presented a powerful historical irony. Expertise developed under conditions of limited opportunity ultimately transcended those very limitations to reshape institutional approaches. As Colonel Whitfield had observed in his 1944 assessment, we have perhaps overlooked our greatest resource, the specialized knowledge our men bring from civilian occupations. This recognition, though limited in its immediate application, contained the seeds of more profound institutional change. The acknowledgement that valuable expertise could emerge from unexpected sources represented a small but meaningful step toward recognizing worth beyond conventional boundaries. For James Walton, the Louisiana lumberjack whose woodland knowledge had proven so unexpectedly valuable in the Belgian forests, the experience represented something both simpler and more profound. As he wrote in a letter to his wife shortly after the operation, "The trees speak the same language everywhere. They taught me in Louisiana, and they taught me again in Belgium. Their lessons transcend all our human divisions. Perhaps that's the most important thing I've learned, that wisdom rarely respects the boundaries we create, and often comes from places we've been taught not to look." This understanding, that valuable knowledge transcends artificial boundaries, perhaps represents the most enduring legacy of the Ardennes operation. Beyond its tactical significance or subsequent influence on military methodologies, it demonstrated a more fundamental truth. Expertise often emerges from unexpected sources, and recognizing its value requires looking beyond conventional assumptions about where wisdom originates. In the dense forests of the Ardennes in April 1944, a Louisiana lumberjack and his fellow soldiers demonstrated this truth through actions that would influence specialized training for decades afterward. Their legacy lives on in methodologies still employed by those who operate in woodland environments, a quiet reminder that knowledge, like the forest itself, grows from diverse roots to create something greater than its individual components. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.